according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods. So do they also unto thee. See, now last time we were introduced to the Lord admonishing the church not to be discovered with an attitude of personal favoritism. We began to go into how personal favoritism destroys relationships, how it is a sin every Christian should approach his or her brother about if they recognize it. Remember, in our outline, we are under the examination of a true sane religion through exposing the sin of personal favoritism. Professor James addresses favoritism sin by giving his readers an example of what it looks like. This was a hypothetical example they probably knew about and could definitely relate to. Now, we can too relate to it. Now let's look at verses 2 through 4 and see what this example is. So the example of personal favoritism within the church. For if there come unto your assembly a man with a gold ring in goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say to him, Sit thou here in a good place, and say to the poor, Stand thou there, or sit under here my footstool. Are ye not then partial in yourselves, and are become judges of evil thoughts? Here's the scenario. Personal favoritism by external sinful judgment. Personal favoritism, that's the scenario here, by external sinful judgment. In verses 2 through 4, the scenario unfolds with a picture of outward sinful judgment taking place within a church-type meeting. Now we can take note of at least 4 things when it comes to appearance judgment within this particular text. Here it is. The place where appearance judgment takes place, that's number 1. The subjects of appearance judgment, that's the wealthy dressed versus the poorly dressed. The works of appearance judgment, that's the privileged seating versus the unprivileged seating. And number 4, the results of appearance judgment, taking the place of God. So let's dive into this. The works of the place where appearance judgment takes place, focusing on the word assembly. In particular, James tells his students of favoritism using a striking example to the scattered dispersion that the scattered dispersion could understand. In the interpretation of this text, there are some different views about what this word assembly stands for. Now, here are some of the ones I found within my study. Number 1, the assembly was a synagogue in which Christian Jews met, and in James is addressing certain Jews while they are carrying on judicial proceedings. Basically, they met in a synagogue. They met in a court of justice, which was in a synagogue. So they were a church inside of a synagogue. And they seem to imply this context from verse 6 of James chapter 2. The problem is, the evidence against this view would be found in looking at the historical aspects of that of the particular time. Christianity was a rejected religion, especially by religious Jews. Why would Christian Jews meet in a place where eventually the leaders would have kicked them out of? Remember, the recipients of this epistle were persecuted and coming out of Jewish homes. Listen to Micah 7, verse 6. For the son dishonoreth the father, and the daughter rises up against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are men of his own house. Jesus also told his disciples about Jewish leaders and their family members' feelings towards them as his followers would be. He said, and a man's foes shall be they of his own household. Matthew 10:36. And if you look at Luke 21, verses 12 through 17, you see this as well. And he ends that verse with saying, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. So why would they be in a place where they're to be hated? Number two, there's the view that it's a public place of worship that these scattered Christians, Jews, met in. So basically, this is a church meeting. This is a church place of worship. This is a church. Okay? Now, Henry Alford in Greek commentary says that synagogue, that the word for synagogue here, that Jewish synagogue is meant. This in the face of an organization of the church implied in James 5:14 would be impossible. The word may well be understood of a Christian assembly, but it is most likely here from the illusion of sitting and standing below a place of Christian worship, the name being a natural one, considering by whom the epistle was written and to whom it was addressed. Now the problem with that is the text does not indicate any worship was taking place at the time. See, no reading of scripture, teaching, singing, praises, etc. is ever mentioned in this particular text. If this was a place of worship, why is it not mentioned when James wrote this epistle? Surely, if James was addressing their public worship service, surely he would have mentioned it, right? Now look how Paul describes worship in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8. And he says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. Prayer and lifting up hands and focusing on doubt and wrath is mentioned when you indicate worship is taking place. None of that is mentioned in James chapter 2. Not even when the two subjects enter the meeting assembly. Now here's what Matthew Henry says. He says, for if they come into your assembly a man with a gold ring. Assembly here is meant of those meetings which were appointed for dedicating matters of difference among the members of the church, and for determining when censures should be passed upon any, and what censures should be. Therefore, the Greek word used here for synagogue signifies such an assembly as that in the Jewish synagogues when they met to do justice. That is, it was expressly provided by the Jews' constitution that when a poor man and a rich man plead together, the rich shall not be bidden to sit down and the poor to stand or sit in a worse place, but sit or both stand alike. To this phrase is used by the apostle a most plain reference, and therefore the assembly here spoken of must be of some as such synagogue as the synagogue assemblies of the Jews, where when they met to hear the causes and to execute justice. To these arbitrations and censures of the Christian assemblies are compared, but we must be careful not to apply what it is here to said of the common assemblies for worship. For in these certainly there may be appointed different places of persons according to their rank and circumstances without sin.